So with that, I am so pleased to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Amanda Schoonmaker. Amanda is a research chair in boreal reclamation and reforestation at NAIT's Centre for Boreal Research. Amanda obtained a BSc-F at the University of British Columbia and PhD at the University of Alberta. She has a field-based ecophysiological plant background with 20 years of field research experience. Since joining NAIT in 2011, she has been working on applied research projects in forest land reclamation and post-harvest reforestation. Research topics in these areas have largely focused on managing vegetation competition to support target tree establishment, seedling planting topics, particularly around timing of seedling establishment, seedling quality, and novel methods of native plant propagation. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Amanda.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to talk a little bit about this project. I think Stacy has her hand up. I don't know if that's intentional. Oh, it disappeared. Okay. All right, then I'll continue. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and assuming that all works out. Are we seeing the good side? Yes. I did it right the first time. Remarkable. So today I'm going to talk about restoring productivity to legacy industrial sites. So these are certified reclaimed well sites. This project was a FRIAA-supported project. Oops. And it involved a number of folks and different companies. So today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the two projects that were, or studies areas that were looked at under this FRIAA project that just wrapped up this past winter. Some of you might be familiar with the longer technical summary that I provided on this back in January. I believe Nicole said she has the transcript from that. So if someone is interested in hearing more about this project at length in like an hour and a half, there is a transcript available for that. This is just an acknowledgement slide just to summarize all the folks that supported that work. And today we're going to focus on the conifer-dominated forests and the results that came out of that. But just to back up a little bit, what is legacy restoration? Why do we care about this? What are we talking about with respect to legacy restoration? So this is really tied to that death by 1,000 cuts. So most of this audience should be familiar somewhat with the oil and gas industry in the sense that they're taking little dribs and drabs out of these operating forest management areas. They're turning them into well sites, roads, seismic lines, facilities, on and on and on. Eventually, these sites are reclaimed by the company responsible, and then they're returned to Crown land. Some of them are certainly regenerating and growing into productive forests, but others are not. And this is largely because reclamation practices have changed over the last 40 years. We have a legacy of historical reclamation that look not unlike this grassy site to our right here. They're not growing productive forest. They haven't been growing productive forest for decades. It seems unlikely that this site is going to be anything other than a grassland in the foreseeable future. So there has been interest in the last several years on what can we do with these sites? How do we kickstart that forest development? And that's really what brought forth this project. So this project had a number of goals. Many of them were long-term. I list them here for broader knowledge, though the reality is today we're going to talk about some very simple metrics, really planted seedling survival and growth and general site recovery metrics. This is associated with sites that were intended to be conifer leading because these other questions that were part of our original investigation are long-term in nature, and we actually have to keep monitoring these sites to really understand how improved management practice will influence biomass and plant diversity. You can't ask that question in 3 years and have a conclusion. You need 10 years probably to do so. So we're going to talk today about what we saw in the first 3 years of this project on the conifer leading sites. That makes sense. little bit about core methods. Again, not enough time to kind of go into big details, but for those that love hearing about seedlings, important points, all of these sites were mechanically treated. So the treatments we imposed in them, the planting treatments were first receiving mechanical treatment. So we didn't plant into straight grass sod. I will explain the mechanical treatment in the next slide, but that happened in November 2021. These sites were planted in early June 2022. And again, these are reclaimed certified well sites. They were located in the Manning Forest Products FMA way out west, so around kilometer 87 to 127 on the Chinchaga, for those that are familiar with that part of Alberta, just about in BC. So pretty quiet area, very old oil field in that area. So some of these sites were quite old. And in each of these sites, we are looking at two main questions. So we're looking at the effect of improved genetics. So does wild versus seed orchard stock behave differently under these retreated conditions? And is there benefit with higher biodiversity planting? So you may, initially, just looking to see if I can get the pointer going here. There's a pointer, perfect. So you may conventionally just want to plant white spruce or lodgepole pine, right? That's, stock that you're going to have available for reforestation, and that might be suitable. So we have that as one treatment group, and then we kick it up a notch. So we put in conifer stock, plus paper birch and green alder into a subset of treatments. And then we have like the high biodiversity treatment. So this is conifer stock, paper birch, green alder, as well as including a native herbaceous species called showy aster. All of these treatments are imposed on the same well site. Basically, the well site is divided into four. One chunk is left untreated. The other three chunks are assigned to one of these three treatment levels. And then genetics component is nested inside of each of those. So we treat these sites through, again, a mechanical treatment. This is corner bitting. It's a treatment that pretty effectively buries the grass sod, at least for a period of time. It's giving you a very similar effect to what mounding is going to do. It's flipping and burying grass, but it's doing it a lot faster. So this dozer is going to be able to do 3 to 5 hours per hectare of treatment. If you were going to try to do this with mounding, it would be 10 to 12 hours per hectare. So it's a cheaper way to get to a pretty significantly disturbed condition. The reason we chose this treatment over something like a McNabb rip plow actually came out of work that was being done under a separate project with Canfor, and we were seeing some benefit to more aggressive grass displacement relative to what the McNabb plow was able to offer. So this gives us lots of cavities and voids for freeze thaw, but it also displaces the grass, not forever, but for a period of time that I think has real value for tree establishment. So this was applied everywhere aside from that one corner of each site that was left as an untreated control. Because again, our longer term objective is to understand that biomass gain. So we've put, heavy iron and tree planting and effort into these sites. Are we going to see it longer term in terms of that sort of stand carbon balance, in terms of the forest development? What's our reference point? And because these sites are so variable, we wanted to have an on-site control for each well site because of the variance between individual sites. That's it for methods. I want to speak a little bit about the soils on this particular set of sites. So there were 6 sites here that were trialed. 2 of them had some pretty significant high salinity indicators kind of denoted on the left here. This is an ordination. We don't need to kind of go into the details of it, but effectively what it's illustrating to us is 4 of the sites are chemistry-wise very similar. 2 of them had these elevated salinity indicators, and they were quite a bit more saline than the other 4. And we saw some different growth responses on these 2 sites, potentially because of that. So I'm going to show you a picture of a couple of photos in the next slides here to illustrate the behavior, the response of the plants to these sites versus this group of sites. So when we look at the statistical data and the means and averages, keep in mind we're averaging over a lot of variability here. So further to that point, these images here show year 2 in 2023, which was also a significant drought year. I don't think anyone in this webinar can forget what 2023 was like. Widespread wildfires, widespread drought. I don't think this area got a drop of rain all summer. These, particularly the conifers on some of these sites, actually didn't grow. So you see that little bit of red on the tip of that white spruce. That white spruce didn't flush a terminal shoot that year. And that we observed that on 3 out of 6 sites. The conifers just were frozen in time. They didn't ultimately die, but they didn't grow much in that second growing season. This effect was exacerbated by salinity. So this is one of the saline sites. This is what the white spruce looked like, but the paper birch on the exact same site, planted into the exact same conditions, grew no problem on this particular site. The other one, it also had pretty hard mortality. What I would hypothesize is that perhaps the salinity here wasn't so bad for the birch, coupled with the fact that the birch probably rooted deeper into the soil in the first year relative to white spruce and lodgepole pine. So it's deciduous trees are very aggressive rooters. They're looking for water. That is mission critical. So in the first growing season in 2022, we had reasonable growing conditions. Actually, the entire experiment looked really good. High survival, everything was pretty decent. So I think the birch rooted deep enough into the soil to access water in that second year. And the white spruce on this site it didn't get there. And it hung on, but it suffered. So compare that with a site down the road, just a non-saline site. So this site didn't have those salinity indicators. This is what the trees looked like in the second growing season. Look at this white spruce. The white spruce stock that was planted in this trial was pretty large. It was, they were 512A or 615A stock, depending on what treatment they were in. They were big cavity stock. There's my clipboard down there. Like that's a white spruce I think any forester could be proud of. And just down the road from the other one. So still drought conditions, but non-saline drought conditions. So this tree was doing better, and certainly the birch was in better condition. So there's variance in this data set. Just a quick note about the cover data. So in the first 3 years, we're really not seeing much in terms of native forbs, woody cover, etc. What I want to draw your attention to is the grasses and to this data point here. So in the first year, we get this is the orange is the control group. That's consistent throughout the graphics here. So this is untreated, no mechanical, relative to all of our biodiversity treatments down here, all the purple, blue, and green. You can see that, of course, in the first year following mechanical treatment, we have a big decline in grasses. That's really important. We wanted to knock back the grasses, and we did do that. So we only see it really strongly in the first year. Anecdotally, we still had that effect in the second year, but you don't see as much difference in the year 2 data because of the 2023 drought. Grasses don't like drought either. And so grass cover itself, even in the control that didn't receive any treatment, has interannual variability on it because of the drought of that year. So we get some control with the grass, but by year 3, we're back to baseline levels. So that period with which we can get in there and plant trees is relatively short. You got to get in there early, give those trees some time to establish. What I want to talk about for a couple minutes here, and I have time still, that's good, is survival and growth. So first with survival. So for white spruce, the graphic on the top here, initial survival in the first year was very high. It was about 90%, but by 3 years in, we're averaging around 45, 50% in the conifer-only planting and the conifer hardwood planting. So this is conifer planted with paper birch and green alder. But when we had hitchhiked conifer, so white spruce that was hitchhiked with showy aster, survival was quite a bit higher. That could be due to it being slightly larger cavity stalk, but it had an aster in with it. So the stalk itself wasn't necessarily bigger. The trees themselves weren't necessarily bigger. This could be an artifact of 6 replicate sites, and the subplots were just generally better. I'm a little suspicious about that because I see this same beneficial effect in some of our other species that were not hitchhiked. Or it could be that the aster and the white spruce are just great growing together and there's some sort of synergistic benefit. So it's a little unclear to me as to why, but what I really want to illustrate is that as a general rule, white spruce, we're losing around half after 3 years. Lodgepole pine, it's even worse. So lodgepole pine, our survival is 20 to 30% after 3 years. So upwards of 70% of the trees that we planted are dead after 3 growing seasons. This is substantial and this is important. So white spruce is doing a little better than lodgepole pine. This could be due to cavity size differences. The pine that was put in here was a bit of a last minute addition. It was just standard stock. I think it was a 411, whereas the white spruce was a 512 or a 615. So much larger cavity stock, a little bit more reserves and resilience to conditions. White spruce also tolerates competition a lot better. So there's a couple reasons for these differences, but the fact is these are not survival rates anyone should be proud of, really. In terms of growth, what I want to illustrate here is that white spruce didn't grow a lot between year 1 and year 2. Really, again, due to that drought, you had a lot of individuals that didn't flush that year, but growth really did resume again in year 3. The other point to raise here is there was a little bit of a growth benefit between the orchard stock versus the wild stock, but it varied depending on what biodiversity treatment it was put into. And you can see here that this difference sort of existed in the first year as well. It was disappearing in the conifer-only planting, but where we had other biodiversity in there, we planted alders and birches and forbs, we're seeing some benefits. So it's pretty early to say that, yes, it's because of biodiversity, all the plants were fairly young, but there was a trend there to some degree. Lodgepole pine, on the other hand, did grow, of the few survivors that were there, it did grow reasonably over that 3-year period. So it kind of plodded along and really did start to take off in year 3 in 2024 when conditions were not so difficult. So though we have low survival in pine, we had fairly good growth. With respect to paper birch and green alder, overall survival in paper birch was similar, whether it was in the high biodiversity or kind of moderate biodiversity treatment, around 67%. Green alder varied a little bit. We see a little bit better survival when it was added to the hitchhike treatment mix and where there's showy aster present. Again, is that because of the aster or for other reasons? It's not clear. It needs to be kind of assessed longer, but still we have high mortality in both species. So, not quite 50% for these, but still pretty substantial mortality. A lot of that mortality was associated with the more saline sites. In terms of growth, birch grew really well in this project. So on average, it's over 1 meter tall. After 3 years, there was individuals that were 2 meters. So it is occupying space on the site. Yes, we may actually want productive conifer stock on these sites, but we want to restore function. And we want to restore diversity to these sites. If we only have white spruce on these sites with grass, this is not a resilient site for decades, right? If this site burns through, white spruce does not tolerate being burnt all that well, but paper birch does. So if we have white spruce and paper birch together and the site get burned in the first 25 years, the paper birch is going to stump sucker. You're still going to have forest vegetation coming back into that site that you may not otherwise have there. That birch is going to grow faster and create canopy cover that's going to help to suppress those grasses faster than what we might get with white spruce alone. So there's reasons to put some of these other species into the mix. And then same idea with green alder. So it was tick-tocking up over time here. A little bit about tree stem counts overall. So again, fairly short-term work. We have a legend here with the different biodiversity treatments. There aren't big differences. So conifer only, conifer and hardwoods, and then conifer and hardwoods with hitchhiked white spruce. So you have some forbs in there. We're seeing higher tree stem counts after 3 years in the hitchhike treatment with the forbs, mainly because the white spruce stock in that treatment had higher survival. So survival was a lot more similar for the other species experiment-wide. But the bigger point to take home from this is I don't even plot the control treatment, right? The no treatment condition, because there's no trees. There might be, I don't know, 10 stems per hectare of tree species on these sites. So we went from a completely non-treed condition to a somewhat treed condition after 3 years, and one that seems to be sustained at least between year 2 and 3. But ultimately, a person wants to measure this longer term to understand if there's still going to be trees there in 10, 15 years, because that's really what matters. So that's it for data, just a couple more on graphics and then a couple of summary slides. So for those that don't know what hitchhiking looks like or what I'm kind of referring to here, this is a white spruce that's co-grown, same nursery cavity with a native herbaceous species. We've done a fair bit of trial work with this over the last several years, and we have some pretty good recipes for white spruce forb mixtures. And this is little visuals of what it looks like. So I'm kind of showing the outer boundaries of where the showy aster is, and we have a little chunky white spruce sitting in the middle of it. So I kind of think of this aster as being like a buffer or a bouncer. It's bouncing out all that non-desirable grassy vegetation and kind of protecting the white spruce from it. So it's adding diversity, right? It's a native herbaceous species that's going to bring in pollinators and birds and other things that are going to be good for restoring functionality to this site. So, and it's going to create cover faster than a tree or even a shrub will. A little bit on just visual images. So, they're all the same way. So we have our untreated area on the same site, conifer only planting, conifer and hardwood. So you can see the green alder here, a little pine here, and then all of them put together. And so there's just a couple of images like this to see visually what this looks like on the ground. And so this is another site where things were going pretty good. So we went from this kind of just grassy, a few willows condition to now having trees, shrubs, and some desirable native herbaceous. Of course, we have more shrubs and trees where we've planted more shrubs and trees. This is one of the saline sites, arguably not as like warm and fuzzy as the previous ones, but certainly relative to the untreated area here where there's nothing. There is not a shrub, there's not a tree to be seen. Conifer only, you can't see the conifer yet, but it's kind of there. And then certainly the conifer hardwood together. So the birch was doing quite well on this site. So it's starting to poke through what is still largely a graminoid canopy. And the wild card here is adding native herbaceous. Will these asters help create non-grass cover longer term? Will they bring in other pollinators that help bring in other seeds and help convert this kind of grass, birch, white spruce buried under here into something that's more diverse and functional? Time will tell. So in summary, the mechanical site preparation that we imposed on these sites, this corner bidding that kind of furrows it and buries the grass, gave us about 2 seasons of relief, but the grass is coming back, so plant them promptly. Mortality of trees and shrubs is high, so our planted stock mortality rates are upwards of 50%. It's pretty typical as an average number to see. We're seeing this in other projects as well. It's not just this study, so we need to consider that. As it takes several years for this sort of native biodiversity question to really unfold, we need to keep looking at these kinds of projects and these kinds of sites because time is important. We've actually only kind of set the early stage here with these biodiversity treatments. I want to see what this site looks like in 5 or 10 years to understand how that birch develops, how those forbs spread, how they influence other things coming back in. In terms of recommendations, so based on the data we have to date, what do you go forward with? You're going to be doing this type of work at scale. What can you take home now? You need to plant high density. So 4,000 to 5,000 stems per hectare of trees and shrubs probably is a little eye-popping, but I think that's where we need to be. The mortality rates are too high. Some sites you're going to get lucky and things are going to do better, but lots of sites they're going to do worse. So if you go to the effort of having mechanical site preparation and all of the cost that comes with that, put enough trees in the ground that you actually can have a chance of a forest. Plant multiple species to buffer for variation in site conditions and climatic extremes. You don't know what climate is coming to you in any given year, and what species are necessarily the most suitable on a site-by-site basis. Plant a mix and hedge your bets. Use mechanical site preparation that buries the grass. This is important. Don't plant trees into straight up grass sod, please. Please don't do that. Tree breeding programs that exist now may be helpful. So we see some benefit with the seed orchard stock and white spruce, but it's pretty modest at this point. Get more trees in the ground. That's probably more important, but continue to assess projects like this to see what that longer term effect is. And then maybe consider other things, larger cavity stock, for example. This may be helpful, but it hasn't been thoroughly tested in this particular context. So with that, I don't really have time for this. I had some future research thoughts, but I'm going to just kind of rip through this real quick. So I think, again, to that point of diversity, continue looking at diversity, herbaceous diversity being part of it. So we need to kind of displace that grass longer term. We do it through mechanical short term. Trees and shrubs are going to get us there longer term. Maybe native herbaceous help us in the medium term, but more research is needed there. We need to improve survival rates of these trees and shrubs. More work needs to be done to dig into the whys on this, and then how do we get around it? While herbicides are generally on the decline right now, they may have some real benefit for these sites, because when you displace grass competition, you do get a big flush of rootal weeds, and that's contributing to some of the high mortality rates. Also, considering where we need to retreat. Some of these sites do have treed vegetation on them. It's low density right now, but maybe it's enough, right? Really getting and digging in where it's needed versus where it's not becomes a more nuanced decision, but it's an important one, because sometimes maybe it's better to continue to let nature do its thing. And with that, I will take questions if there are any, and otherwise, thank you for listening.